In this video, what I'd like to cover is the essential movements which all exercise prescriptions should be approached. Now, we're going to approach this in the context of the occupational athlete. This includes anyone's occupation that requires physical activity, hard physical movements, could be considered strenuous. So this would include firefighters, EMT personnel, police, military. Another word for this is often used is tactical fitness. Okay, so we're going to do this in the context of the fire service for an example today. So what we're going to do is in the area, we've already talked about the 10 general fitness skills that involve either improvement through training and practice, or practice alone. Now, these are general physical skills that someone must do, but what this list doesn't talk about essentially is what types of movements should we be prescribing? Well, all of the movements should focus around a primary group, and this involves the 5 basic movements. Now, the 5 basic movements starts off with what I consider to be the most important movement that any prescription program should include. This is a lifelong movement. It involves the occupational athlete. It involves all sports athletes. It involves individuals with different abilities, different age groups, and that's the squat. The squat really is the primary movement that we should be programming in for our athletes, getting up and getting down. Okay, this really, if you think about it, we use it every day, getting in and out of chairs. If you don't like to sit, I'm sure that you have gotten in and out of a bathroom at least once in your life. If not, that's weird. But anyway, what we want to do is program the squat because it is a primary activity of daily living. The hip hinge is our second movement. This can be seen in movements such as the Romanian deadlift, regular deadlift, straight leg deadlift, anything where we're going to be bending primarily at the waist into a hip flexion position and then standing back up. Pushing things around, pushing them with your hands, pushing them with your legs. Pulling objects is of primary importance. And then finally, brace, balance, and carry an object. So if you think about these in terms of an athlete in a given sport, say for example, a baseball player squatting down to pick up a ball, hip hinging as they reach to swing a bat, pushing or pulling an object, bracing, balancing, and carrying for potential impacts, say with a wall, with another athlete on the field, for the catcher with someone coming down the third baseline. But these are also universal for any movements around the house, right? Carrying groceries in may require you to squat for the bottom of your grocery cart, pick up the item. Hip hinge could be putting the groceries down on your doorstep while you fumble with your keys to get in the house. Pushing your groceries into a high cabinet, pulling other items off of the top shelf to put in. And then balance, brace, carry. I know that for me specifically, I try to make as few trips in and out of the house carrying groceries as possible. So I tend to load up the bags and try to carry them all at the same time. And that involves this brace, balance, and carry. So these are universal exercise movements that can be used not only for sports, for occupational athletes, but also for any individual who is looking for a prescription for exercise from you. Now we can expand these a little bit, and we're going to talk in, again, the context of the firefighter here. They've expanded this to the big 8. And now what we're doing is we're looking more at movements rather than, or I should say more about actions rather than specific movements. The big 8 includes core strength, cardiovascular capacity, flexibility, and then the ability to drag, carry, push, pull, and lift. Now, the interesting thing about these is it is not isolated to specific muscles. So prescribing a program for the bicep, for the tricep, for the glutes, for the hamstrings, is really not an appropriate way to prescribe exercise. So when someone comes to you and says, well, I'd really like to have bigger calves. Well, I think your question should be, What do you want to have bigger calves for? Why is that a goal of yours? Because ultimately, if we're not in a true physique competition or a bodybuilding measure, most people should be talking about the functionality. I want to jump higher, run faster, carry more, lift heavier, reach further, be able to go for longer. Those are the sort of questions that you're looking for your client to answer. But let's talk about these 8 movements in the context of the 5 primary ones. Core strength, or balance and bracing, really is about stabilizing. When we talk about stability, we talk about a slow movement that is smooth, but a smooth movement is strong. This is a phrase that I'll often have people visualize while they're doing core strength exercises. What we want to do when we're balancing and bracing is we don't want to put a lot of torque. Remember that torque is a rotationary force. So we don't want any rotary forces while we're balancing and bracing. The rotary forces are what are primarily going to cause injury in both athletics and occupations. We also want the athlete to avoid hyperflexed or hyperextended positions, specifically at their back. Now, a basic core strengthening routine could be holding positions anywhere from 10 to 60 seconds, 2 to 4 sets of that exercise, pick 3 to 10 different exercise, and do this 2 to 4 times a week for 5 to 10 minutes. The perfect exercise for core strength, in my opinion, is the overhead squat. Taking a dumbbell, kettlebell, sandbag, barbell, any type of implement, holding it over your head and getting into a squat position. What this does is this allows us to work 2 things at once: the balance and brace and the squat position. Even having the ability to hold a weight over your head in a static position will actually provide you with the greatest stimulus for your abdominals. Notice I never talked about curls or sit-ups here, because those really aren't a functional activity when you think about them. They may help you, in fact, get a nice six-pack if that's what you're looking for, but let's go back to the functionality of that movement. What does that do for you in everyday life? Curling up into a little ball on the floor? That's not exactly a position we want to be in sport. Cardiovascular capacity. In the context of firefighters, these individuals, you have to think, they work in short, intense bouts. They ride in a vehicle to the scene, they get out of that vehicle, and they have to go, go, go. They get out of the scene, they take a break. Maybe they change their air tank, they go back in, and it's go, 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 and they get out and they rest again. Now, for these individuals, they have to consider, do they want to do a high intensity activity or do they want to do a strictly lower intensity endurance activity? Either one is acceptable. Because they primarily work in short, intense bouts, we should be recommending high intensity, short duration activities. As we know from our bioenergetics materials, the short, high-intensity activities will actually translate to the longer aerobic efforts. And so we get the best of both worlds training like that. Oftentimes, these individuals will start working off in gym clothes, and then they'll go to a full oxygen consumption test. We see in the picture here someone working with an air tank on. The next step would be to have this person starting to put their gear on. You have to take a look at what the athlete or occupational athlete is doing in their profession. Firefighters can carry up to 100 or more pounds on their back if they're going upstairs. This includes their air tank, their PPE, their turnout gear that they wear, their helmet, and carrying tools or hoses. So what we want to do is we want to work starting with them moving just in gym clothes and start building this extra weight so that it doesn't become abnormal for them. For their cardiovascular capacity, what I'd like to prescribe is anywhere from 10 to 60 minutes using intervals that last as short as 15 seconds up to 5 minutes of full go. And then have these on efforts that they're going to be producing greater than or equal to about 80% effort. And this can be done in a variety of modes: treadmills, stairs, ladders, crawling, carrying, sledgehammers, battle hose, running, whatever it may be for these individuals to try and recreate an event that they're going to potentially see further on down the line. Flexibility and mobility is important for our occupational and our regular athletes. These involve both static and dynamic movements. All of your flexibility programs should focus on the major muscle groups and include foam rolling. Foam rolling is an extremely effective way to increase mobility. What we like to do is focus on this 3 to 4 times a week for 5 to 10 minutes and maybe stick 30 to 45 seconds per exercise. Flexibility is very difficult to work on. And the reason for this is you don't see huge gains in it. So it's difficult for an individual to perceive that they're actually making progress. But what you have to do as the strength and conditioning professional is encourage them to use these movements, identify where they may be lacking in flexibility and mobility, and concentrate on those efforts. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. So back to the context of our original 5 motions, balance, embrace, and carry are extremely important. So individuals can drag things, they can push things, they can carry things up and down stairs. They can do what we see here on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. That's called a farmer's carry, putting 2 weights in your arm and walking back and forth. If you've never done that, that is a great challenging exercise. It's a good core exercise, especially if you're having them focus on abdominal strength and abdominal platform as they're walking up and down, not flexing side to side, forward or backward. Push-pull. We can see a number of ways that we can implement pushing and pulling. We can push sleds. We can do push-ups. We can do pull-ups. We can use a lot of variety of implements around the gym or outside to have them pulling weight. What we see on the bottom left-hand side here is someone who is doing a bear crawl. And what they're doing is with every step, they're advancing a small kettlebell on the ground, pulling that along. So here we get some stability, balance, core work, as well as some pushing and pulling. Lifting. Lifting includes both squatting and hip hinging. We've talked about these previously in this movement, but we're not only talking about a strict squat. We're talking about deadlifts. You can see here we have some dumbbell deadlifts on the bottom right-hand side. We have a kettlebell squat on the top right-hand side. We can do this with lunges. We can do it with body weight lunges. We can do it with weighted lunges, however we would look to do. Kettlebell swings, as seen in the upper left-hand side, the third individual there is doing kettlebell swings. Those involve hip hinge and squats. So all of these are good functional movements that we should be encouraging our athletes to use as they progress in our exercise programs. So just to sum up again, our 5 basic movements should be the integral part of any exercise prescription. And that's going to involve the ability to squat down with your hips below parallel. We don't want to stop above our knees, and then stand back up again. Hip hinging, or lifting an item off of the ground in movements such as a deadlift or an RDL or a single leg deadlift. Pushing objects from here to there, right? Sliding a sled across the ground, pulling an object. We can use a rope tied to that same sled, have the athlete push the sled the length of a room, walk back to the other side and grab a rope and pull the sled back to them, pushing and pulling. And then finally, brace, balance, carry, right? Carrying objects in a farmer's walk, as we see here in the upper right-hand side, or just for a stability platform, loading up heavy weights to a rack, putting it on our shoulders, standing there for 30 seconds, unracking the weight while we focus on having a nice, tight abdominal section, a nice, tight core, taking deep, smooth breaths. That time under weight or time under the bar is extremely important. We're not asking this athlete to squat. We're not asking this athlete to press that weight over their head. Simply what we're doing is we're putting a heavy load on them and asking them to stabilize. So remember that when you're prescribing your exercise program, we want to focus on these 5 basic movements.